Daniel Reed, the ruthless CEO of Pinnacle Technologies, follows his assistant home to fire her, only to discover she's raising quadruplets alone in poverty, with a shocking connection to his past he never imagined. His world unravels when he spots his childhood family photo on her wall. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Pinnacle Technologies' executive floor hummed with the same cold efficiency that Daniel Reed demanded from his employees. At 45, Daniel had built his software empire from scratch, transforming a college dorm project into a multi-billion-dollar corporation that dominated the industry. The glass and steel headquarters in downtown Boston mirrored its founder, sharp, imposing, and utterly devoid of warmth. "She's late again, Mr. Reed," Veronica, his executive assistant, announced with the professional disdain she reserved for those who failed to meet her boss's exacting standards. "Third time this month." Daniel glanced at his watch, a timepiece worth more than what most of his employees earned in a year, and frowned. "Elena Reyes." "Yes, HR sent up her file as requested." Veronica placed a slim folder on his immaculate desk. "They've documented all her tardiness and absences, grounds for immediate termination as per company policy." Daniel opened the folder, scanning the personnel file with practiced detachment. Elena Reyes, 32, software developer, exceptional coding skills, but increasingly unreliable attendance. Hired 18 months ago during Pinnacle's acquisition of her previous employer, SmartCode Solutions. He remembered vaguely approving the retention of their top talent, though he'd never personally met most of those employees. "When she arrives, send her to conference room B," Daniel said, closing the file with a snap, "and have security ready to escort her out afterward." Just as Veronica turned to leave, a harried young woman with dark circles beneath her eyes rushed through the door, her arms full of folders and a laptop bag slung haphazardly over her shoulder. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The bus was—" Elena Reyes stopped mid-sentence, her tired eyes widening as she registered the CEO's presence. "Mr. Reed, I didn't expect—" "Conference room B, Ms. Reyes," Daniel cut her off coldly. "Now." Elena's face drained of color as she nodded, depositing her belongings at her desk before following Daniel's rigid back down the hallway. The conference room, like everything else in the building, was designed to intimidate. A long obsidian table surrounded by high-backed chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city Daniel felt he owned. "Please sit." He gestured to a chair, remaining standing himself to maintain the power dynamic. Elena perched on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Up close, Daniel noticed how thin she looked, her collarbones prominent beneath her modest blouse. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame a face that might once have been beautiful before exhaustion carved its permanent marks. "Ms. Reyes, your performance at Pinnacle has become unacceptable," Daniel began, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your technical skills are not in question, but your reliability is. This company doesn't tolerate mediocrity or excuses." "Mr. Reed, if I could explain—" "I've heard all the explanations before," he interrupted. "Personal problems, transportation issues, health concerns. Everyone has problems, Ms. Reyes. Successful people overcome them rather than using them as crutches." Elena fell silent, a slight tremor in her lower lip, the only indication of her distress. Something about her quiet dignity irritated Daniel, more than if she had protested loudly or broken down in tears. "However," he continued, surprising himself, "given your technical contributions, I'm willing to hear exactly what's preventing you from meeting your professional obligations before making my final decision." Elena looked up, genuine surprise crossing her features. Thank you, Mr. Reed. I know my attendance hasn't been ideal lately, but I've completed all my assignments, often working extra hours from home to compensate. Your output isn't the issue. Your unpredictability is disruptive to your team, Daniel stated flatly. If there's a legitimate reason for this pattern, I need to know it now. A shadow passed over Elena's face as she seemed to calculate how much to reveal. I have children, she finally said, and our childcare situation has been complicated recently. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Children aren't an excuse for professional failings, Ms. Reyes. Countless employees manage parenthood without it, affecting their performance. Yes, sir, Elena replied, her voice barely audible. I understand. Something about her resignation sparked an unfamiliar feeling in Daniel, perhaps curiosity, or maybe the ghost of empathy, long buried beneath years of corporate ruthlessness. Whatever it was, it made him veer from his usual script. I've made no secret that I value results over excuses, Daniel said, standing to signal the conversation was ending. I'll make my decision by the end of the day. Elena nodded, rising from her chair. Thank you for the opportunity to explain, Mr. Reed. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that working at Pinnacle has been important to me. As she turned to leave, Daniel noticed she'd left her company badge on the table, as if she'd already accepted her termination as inevitable. The sight of it bothered him more than it should have. That afternoon, Daniel sat in his office, Elena's file open before him. Her technical evaluations were exemplary. Innovative solutions, elegant code, consistently ahead of deadlines despite her attendance issues. On paper, she was exactly the kind of talent Pinnacle needed to maintain its competitive edge. Veronica, he called through the intercom. What's Ms. Reyes working on currently? The Morrison banking interface, sir, came the prompt reply. She's lead developer on that project. Daniel frowned. The Morrison contract was worth millions, with a tight deadline looming. Replacing her mid-project would cost time they couldn't afford. Has she submitted any code today? He asked. Yes, sir. I'd report she's pushed 3 updates to the repository in the last 4 hours, all passing quality checks. Daniel drummed his fingers on his desk, an unusual hesitation overtaking his normally decisive nature. The rational business choice was clear. Keep her until the Morrison project was complete, then terminate her. Yet something about Elena Reyes lingered in his mind like an unsolved equation. At 6 o'clock, when most employees had departed, Daniel found himself standing at his floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights emerge against the darkening sky. He'd built Pinnacle on unwavering principles: excellence, reliability, no exceptions. Making an exception for Elena Reyes would undermine everything he stood for. Sir, Veronica appeared at his door. Ms. Reyes has left for the day. Shall I have HR prepare the termination papers for tomorrow? Daniel turned from the window. No, I want to see her living situation for myself. Excuse me? Veronica couldn't hide her surprise. Her address. Get it for me. Daniel reached for his coat. If she's going to claim family obligations as an excuse, I want to verify the situation personally. Veronica hesitated only momentarily before retrieving the information. She lives in Dorchester, sir. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not the best neighborhood. 20 minutes later, Daniel's sleek black Aston Martin purred through streets that grew progressively narrower and more neglected. The elegant skyscrapers of downtown Boston gave way to crowded triple-deckers with peeling paint and sagging porches. He checked the address against his GPS, increasingly certain he'd made a wrong turn. But there it was, a small, worn duplex with crumbling front steps and a yard the size of his private bathroom. Daniel parked across the street, observing the house with mounting disbelief. This was where one of his software developers lived, The motion-sensing light above the door flickered on as Elena appeared, struggling to unlock her front door while balancing grocery bags. Daniel watched as she disappeared inside, debating his next move. This impromptu surveillance suddenly seemed ill-conceived, more the action of an irrational person than the calculating businessman he prided himself on being. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to drive away. After several minutes of internal debate, Daniel exited his car and approached the house. The concrete steps shifted slightly beneath his Italian leather shoes. He raised his hand to knock, but paused at the sound of a child's laughter from within. Then another child's voice, similar but distinct. And another. How many children did she have? Before he could reconsider, Daniel knocked firmly on the door. The sounds inside immediately hushed. Footsteps approached, and the door opened a crack, revealing Elena's shocked face. "Mr. Reed?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you... How... Did you... May I come in, Ms. Reyes?" Daniel asked, his authoritative tone inappropriate for the setting, but the only one he knew how to use. Elena hesitated, then opened the door wider, revealing an apartment that was modest but meticulously clean. The furniture was clearly second-hand, the walls in need of fresh paint, but there were touches of care everywhere. Handmade curtains, a bookshelf stuffed with children's books, walls adorned with colorful artwork. "Mama, who is it?" A small voice called from the next room. Elena's eyes darted nervously between Daniel and the source of the voice. "It's someone from work, Lucas. Please take your sisters to the kitchen and start your homework." Daniel stepped further into the living room, intent on observing the complicated childcare situation Elena had mentioned. What he saw stopped him cold. 4 identical faces peered around the doorframe, 2 boys and 2 girls, about 5 years old, with the same dark eyes, same oval faces, same curious expressions. Quadruplets. "Ms. Reyes, you have 4 children?" Daniel asked, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. "Yes," Elena answered simply, moving to stand protectively between Daniel and the children. "Lucas, Matteo, Isabella, and Sofia. Please, I asked you to go to the kitchen." The children disappeared reluctantly, though Daniel could feel them watching from around the corner. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the modest surroundings, the obvious financial struggles, the sheer logistical challenge Elena faced every day. Then his gaze landed on a framed photograph on the wall, and the world tilted beneath his feet. The photo showed a much younger Elena standing beside a familiar man, Daniel's father, Richard Reed. They were in a laboratory setting, both wearing white coats, smiling proudly at the camera. It was a photo Daniel recognized, having an identical one in his own study. His father, with his research team at Reed Pharmaceuticals, the company that had funded Daniel's education and his initial business venture. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. Next to this professional photo was a smaller, more personal one, a family photograph from Daniel's childhood. His parents, his younger sister and himself, at about 12 years old, standing in front of their summer home in Martha's Vineyard. A photo that should have been in family albums, not on the wall of a struggling software developer's apartment. "Where did you get that photograph?" Daniel demanded, his voice sharp with shock. Elena followed his gaze, her expression changing from confusion to realization. You're Richard's son," she whispered, her face paling. "I should have made the connection when I was hired, but I never saw you in person until recently, and I didn't think." "How do you have a picture of my family in your home?" Daniel pressed, advancing toward the wall to examine the photo more closely. It was undeniably genuine. He remembered the day it was taken, his mother fussing with his collar, his father's rare good mood. Elena seemed to struggle for words. "Your father was my mentor," she finally said, At the university lab, before everything happened. Before what happened? Daniel asked, though a sinking feeling told him he already knew the answer. Before the clinical trial failure. Before Reed Pharmaceuticals collapsed. Elena's voice grew quieter. Before your father died. The mention of his father's death, a heart attack that came suspiciously soon after his company's downfall, sent a familiar wave of grief and anger through Daniel. He'd built Pinnacle partly as redemption for his father's failed legacy, determined never to repeat the mistakes that had destroyed Reed Pharmaceuticals. That doesn't explain why you have our family photo, Daniel insisted. Elena took a deep breath. Your father gave it to me. He was very kind to me when I was going through a difficult time. He treated me like family. Before Daniel could demand more explanation, one of the children, Lucas he presumed, peeked around the corner again. Mama, we're hungry. Just a few minutes, mi amor, Elena assured him, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. Mr. Reed was just leaving. No, I'm not, Daniel replied, his voice firm. Not until I understand what's going on here. The tension between them was palpable, years of buried history threatening to surface. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. Had his father been secretly supporting this woman? Was there something inappropriate between them? The age difference would have made that unlikely, but still. Please, Elena whispered, glancing toward the kitchen where the children waited. This isn't a good time. Daniel was about to insist when he heard a small crash from the kitchen, followed by a child's cry. Elena immediately rushed toward the sound, maternal instinct overriding any concern about leaving Daniel alone with his questions. Left momentarily alone, Daniel moved closer to examine the photographs. His father had been a brilliant research scientist whose ambition had ultimately been his downfall, rushing a promising drug to market before adequate testing, resulting in severe side effects that destroyed the company's reputation and finances. Daniel had spent years distancing himself from that failure, building Pinnacle as its antithesis, methodical, cautious, perfect. So why would his father's photograph be displayed prominently in this home, alongside their family picture? Daniel followed the sound of voices to the kitchen, where he found a scene of organized chaos. Elena was cleaning up spilled milk while simultaneously comforting one child and instructing another on proper cup handling. The quadruplets moved around her like satellites, each with distinct personalities despite their identical appearances. Let me help, Daniel found himself saying, grabbing a dish towel to mop up the spreading puddle of milk. Elena looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting this corporate tyrant to be on his knees cleaning her kitchen floor. The children stared at him with undisguised curiosity. Are you Mama's boss? One of the girls asked boldly. Sophia, Elena warned gently. Mr. Reed is very busy and was just leaving. Yes, I'm your mother's boss, Daniel answered directly, ignoring Elena's hint. And I came here because she's been late to work several times. That's because the bus is always late, the other boy, Matteo, explained matter-of-factly. And sometimes Isabella gets sick in the mornings. Matteo, that's enough, Elena interjected. Mr. Reed doesn't need to hear about our transportation challenges. Daniel stood, surveying the four identical faces watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. Despite himself, he was impressed by their articulate speech and the obvious bond between them. How do you manage? The question escaped him before he could consider its inappropriateness. 4 5-year-olds by yourself? Elena's composure briefly faltered. One day at a time, Mr. Reed. Now, if you'll excuse us, it's dinner time, and then the children have their reading practice. I read at 3rd grade level already, Lucas announced proudly. That's impressive, Daniel acknowledged, genuinely surprised. Mama teaches us after work. Isabella added shyly. She says education is our ticket to a better life. Something uncomfortable twisted in Daniel's chest. Recognition, perhaps, of the same drive his own father had instilled in him. The belief that knowledge was power, that excellence was the only acceptable standard. The children need to eat, Elena said firmly. Whatever your questions about those photographs, they can wait for another time. Daniel realized he was intruding on their evening routine, yet he couldn't bring himself to leave with so many unanswered questions hanging between them. I'll wait in the living room, he stated, making it clear this wasn't a request. Elena's expression tightened, but she nodded. The children will need to start their bedtime routine in an hour. Back in the sparse living room, Daniel found himself drawn again to the wall of photographs. Besides the two that had shocked him, there were many others, the quadruplets as infants, as toddlers, at what appeared to be their first day of preschool. Elena appeared in some, looking progressively more tired as the children grew, but there was no sign of a father, no partner sharing the immense responsibility of raising 4 children simultaneously. His phone buzzed with emails demanding attention, but for once, Daniel ignored them. There was a mystery here that touched something long buried in his past. His father, whose memory was both painful and precious to him, had been important enough to this woman that his photograph held a place of honor in her home. The sounds of dinner continued from the kitchen, children's voices, the clatter of utensils, Elena's patient responses to multiple questions asked simultaneously. The domestic symphony was entirely foreign to Daniel, whose modernist penthouse overlooking the harbor was designed for solitary efficiency. After what seemed like an appropriate interval, Daniel heard the dinner routine concluding. Small feet padded down the hallway, followed by the sound of a bath running. Elena appeared in the living room doorway, her expression guarded. "The children are getting ready for bed," she said. "Whatever you came here to say, this would be the time." Daniel met her gaze directly. "I came to finalize my decision about your employment, but now I find myself with more questions than answers." Elena sighed, sinking into a worn armchair across from him. "What do you want to know?" "Start with how you knew my father," Daniel demanded, his tone softening despite himself, "and why his picture and mine are on your wall." Elena's eyes drifted to the photographs, a complex emotion crossing her features. "I was an undergraduate research assistant in his lab. Brilliant but poor, he used to say. He took me under his wing, believed in me when no one else did." She paused, gathering herself. "When I became pregnant unexpectedly, he was the only person who didn't tell me to give up my education." Daniel listened, trying to reconcile this compassionate mentor with the driven, often absent father he remembered. That explains his professional photograph, not our family picture. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "After the clinical trial disaster, when everyone was abandoning him, I stayed. I continued working in the lab, trying to find where the research had gone wrong. He was grateful. Said I was the daughter he wished he'd had." The comment stung unexpectedly. Daniel had spent his entire adult life trying to redeem his father's legacy, and here was this stranger claiming a closer connection than he had ever managed to achieve. "Your father gave me that family photo the week before he died," Elena continued, softly. "He said he wanted me to remember that he had a son who would someday do great things, who might someday help me if I ever needed it." Her eyes met Daniel's directly. "I never planned to ask for that help, never even considered approaching you until now." "Yet you accepted a job at my company," Daniel pointed out, suspicion edging his voice. "I was hired when Pinnacle acquired SmartCode. I had no idea of the connection until I saw your name on the company materials after the acquisition. By then, I desperately needed the job." Elena's voice was steady despite the evident strain of the conversation. The health insurance alone is the reason Isabella can get her treatments. Treatments? What's wrong with her? Chronic kidney condition. Nothing life-threatening with proper care, but the medications and specialist visits are expensive. Elena stood abruptly as a child's voice called from the bathroom. "Excuse me, they need help with their pajamas." Left alone again, Daniel found his gaze drawn to a stack of medical bills partially hidden beneath a book on the side table. The glimpse of numbers he caught confirmed Elena's assertion. The treatments were indeed expensive, likely consuming most of her salary despite Pinnacle's decent health plan. When Elena returned, the apartment had grown quieter, the children apparently settled in their bedroom. She looked exhausted, the weight of her responsibilities evident in the slump of her shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me about your connection to my father?" Daniel asked, his voice less accusatory than before. "Would it have made a difference?" Elena countered. "Would you have treated me differently than any other employee with attendance issues? Or would you have suspected I was trying to manipulate you through your father's memory?" The question was uncomfortably perceptive. Daniel would indeed have suspected manipulation, might even have fired her more quickly to avoid any complication. "Besides," Elena continued, "your father and I had different views about what happened with that drug trial. He maintained until the end that the research was sound, that the side effects were exaggerated by competitors. I wasn't so sure." Daniel stiffened. His father's reputation was a sensitive point. Despite the evidence, he had always chosen to believe Richard Reed was a victim of corporate sabotage rather than his own hubris. "You believe my father was at fault?" he asked coldly. "I believe he was a brilliant scientist who wanted desperately to help people," Elena replied carefully. "But I also believe he rushed that drug to market because of financial pressures from investors, pressure that might have clouded his scientific judgment." The assessment was measured, neither blindly loyal nor unfairly critical. It resonated uncomfortably with doubts Daniel had suppressed for years. "Mama!" A small voice interrupted from the hallway. One of the girls, Isabella, Daniel guessed from the slight pallor of her complexion, stood in her pajamas, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. "Yes, mi amor," Elena responded, her voice transforming into something softer. "My tummy hurts," the child said, "and Lucas won't stop talking about space rockets." Elena crossed to her daughter, feeling her forehead with practiced concern. "No fever. Did you take your medicine after dinner?" Isabella nodded solemnly. "Can you read us a story?" "Lucas says he's too old for stories, but he's wrong." Elena glanced back at Daniel apologetically. "I need to settle them for the night." "I should go," Daniel said, rising from his seat. This glimpse into Elena's personal life had been more revealing than he'd anticipated, raising questions he wasn't prepared to face. "We'll continue this discussion at the office tomorrow." "Am I still employed then?" Elena asked directly, one arm around her daughter's shoulders. Daniel hesitated. By any objective measure, Elena's attendance issues remained problematic. Yet the context he'd discovered complicated the clean equation of performance and consequences that usually guided his decisions. "For now," he said finally, "we'll revisit your situation once I've had time to consider everything I've learned tonight." Relief flickered across Elena's tired face. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." As Daniel moved toward the door, Isabella's small voice piped up again. "Are you going to fire my mama?" Daniel froze, unused to such direct questions from children. "That's a grown-up decision that hasn't been made yet," he answered awkwardly. "Please don't," the child said simply. "She works really hard, and she cries sometimes when she thinks we're asleep." "Isabella," Elena admonished gently, but the damage was done. The image of Elena weeping silently after her children were in bed bearing the immense burden of raising quadruplets alone while working full-time, hit Daniel with unexpected force. He'd always prided himself on making business decisions untainted by emotion, yet here he was, standing in the humble living room of an employee, with his father's photograph watching him from the wall and a child's innocent plea ringing in his ears. "Good night, Ms. Reyes," he managed, opening the front door. "I'll see you at the office." The cool night air was a relief after the emotional complexity of Elena's apartment. Daniel stood on the crumbling steps for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of bedtime routines resuming inside. A child's laugh, Elena's gentle voice beginning what sounded like a familiar story. As he walked to his car, Daniel found himself looking back at the modest duplex with its flickering porch light and peeling paint. Something his father had once told him surfaced in his memory. A man's true character isn't measured by how he treats his equals, but by how he treats those who need his help. Daniel had always interpreted that as justification for his father's obsession with his research, helping humanity through scientific advancement. Now he wondered if the lesson had been more personal, more immediate. Starting his car, Daniel made a mental note to have his assistant pull all records related to Reed Pharmaceuticals' final drug trial. There were questions about his father's legacy that suddenly seemed urgent to answer. Questions that might help him understand the complicated connection between the company he'd built and the struggling mother raising quadruplets in Dorchester. As he drove back toward his waterfront penthouse, the contrasts between his life and Elena's couldn't have been more stark. Yet something about her situation, her determination, her quiet dignity in the face of overwhelming challenges, reminded him uncomfortably of himself in the years after his father's disgrace, when he'd worked tirelessly to rebuild the Reed name through Pinnacle's success. Tomorrow, he would need to make a decision about Elena Reyes. But for tonight, Daniel found himself haunted by 4 identical faces and a family photograph that connected his past to a present he never could have imagined. Daniel Reed arrived at Pinnacle Technologies earlier than usual the next morning, his mind still processing the revelations of the previous night. The usual early morning tranquility of his executive floor felt different today. The emptiness that normally allowed him to think clearly now seemed sterile and disconnected from the messy reality he'd glimpsed in Elena's apartment. "You're in early, Mr. Reed," Veronica remarked as she arrived precisely at 7, as she had every workday for the past 8 years. "Shall I have the kitchen send up your usual?" "No," Daniel replied, surprising both of them. "I need you to pull everything we have on Reed Pharmaceuticals' final clinical trial and see if HR has any additional background on Elena Reyes. Educational. History, references, anything from before her time at SmartCode." Veronica's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly, but she asked no questions. "Right away, sir. Also, the board is expecting your decision on the Morrison project resources by noon." Daniel nodded, though the high-priority project that had consumed his attention for weeks now seemed oddly distant. "Tell them I'll have it after my 10 o'clock. Alone in his office, Daniel opened his laptop and searched for Elena Reyes in Pinnacle's employee database. Her file was sparse. Excellent performance evaluations from SmartCode, a computer science degree from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, his father's alma mater, he noted, and the basic background check Pinnacle required for all employees. What wasn't in the file were the things Daniel had witnessed firsthand: the 4 identical children, the struggling single mother, the connection to Richard Reed that had somehow been missed during the acquisition. A notification appeared on his screen. Elena had just badged into the building 10 minutes early, despite everything. Daniel watched through the security feed as she hurried through the lobby, looking more put together than yesterday, but still bearing the unmistakable signs of exhaustion in the shadows beneath her eyes and the slight stoop of her shoulders. His intercom buzzed, Sir, Ms. Reyes is requesting a moment of your time before the development team meeting. Daniel hesitated, not yet ready for the confrontation. Tell her I'm in calls until 10. As the morning progressed, Daniel found himself distracted from his usual laser-focused routine. Between meetings, he searched online for information about quadruplets, their rarity, the unique challenges they presented, the financial burden they placed on families. The statistics were sobering. Even with good insurance, the medical costs alone could be crippling, not to mention the logistical complexity of raising 4 same-age children. At 9:55, Veronica delivered a thick folder to his desk. Everything we could find on Reed Pharmaceuticals' RP619 trial, sir, and Ms. Reyes's complete background check from the SmartCode acquisition. Daniel flipped through the documents, recognizing the familiar clinical trial data that had haunted his family for years. RP619 had been his father's miracle drug, a revolutionary treatment for autoimmune disorders that had shown immense promise in early trials. But the Phase 3 trials had revealed severe side effects in a small percentage of patients, and competitors had pounced, sensationalizing the risks and triggering a stock collapse that destroyed the company's value overnight. What caught his eye was a name he hadn't noticed before in the research team roster: E. Reyes, undergraduate research assistant. Elena had been telling the truth about working in his father's lab. He dug deeper into the side effect reports, comparing them against the preliminary data. Something seemed off about the statistical analysis, but before he could pursue that thought, his calendar alert reminded him of the development team meeting. Elena was already seated in the conference room when Daniel arrived, her head bent over her laptop as she reviewed code. She looked up as he entered, her expression carefully neutral despite the personal bombshell between them. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said professionally, giving no indication of their encounter the night before. Daniel nodded, taking his place at the head of the table as the rest of the team filtered in. Throughout the hour-long meeting, he found himself observing Elena with new awareness. She spoke concisely and intelligently about the Morrison interface. Challenges, offered solutions to problems other developers raised, and demonstrated an expertise that validated her technical evaluations. If the other team members noticed the CEO paying unusual attention to a mid-level developer, they gave no sign. Daniel had always prided himself on knowing every aspect of Pinnacle's operations, so his detailed questions about Elena's portion of the project wouldn't have seemed out of character. As the meeting concluded, Daniel made his decision. "Ms. Reyes, a word before you go." The other developers filed out, leaving them alone in the glass-walled conference room. Elena stood with the rigid posture of someone bracing for bad news. "I've decided not to terminate your employment," Daniel stated without preamble. "Your contributions to the Morrison project are too valuable to lose at this stage." Relief flickered across Elena's face, quickly replaced by wariness. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I appreciate the opportunity to continue my work here. However," Daniel continued, "your attendance issues need to be addressed. Given your situation, I'm authorizing a more flexible schedule. You may work remotely 2 days a week, provided all your deadlines are met and you're available for critical meetings." Elena blinked, clearly caught off guard by this unexpected accommodation. "That's very generous, sir." "It's not generosity, Ms. Reyes, it's pragmatism." Daniel's tone remained businesslike. "Pinnacle needs your skills, and this arrangement will maximize your productivity while minimizing disruptions." He wasn't being entirely truthful. While Elena's technical contributions were indeed valuable, Pinnacle employed dozens of talented developers who could have stepped into her role. What Daniel wasn't ready to admit, even to himself, was that his decision stemmed from something more complicated than business calculations. "There's one more thing," he added, gathering his papers. "I'd like to continue our conversation about my father tonight, if you're available." Elena hesitated, unconsciously twisting the simple silver ring she wore on her right hand. "The children, I'll come to your home again," Daniel interrupted. "After they're asleep, if that's more convenient." After a moment's consideration, Elena nodded. 9:30 would work. They're usually settled by then. 9:30 it is. Daniel stood to signal the end of the conversation. "And Ms. Reyes, thank you for your honesty last night." As Elena left, Daniel returned to his office, oddly unsettled by the interaction. In 15 years of building Pinnacle from the ground up, he had never made special accommodations for an employee's personal circumstances. His management philosophy had always been ruthlessly egalitarian, the same high standards applied to everyone, regardless of their situation. Yet here he was, creating a custom arrangement for a woman he barely knew, based on a connection to his father that was still shrouded in questions. "The board is waiting for your decision on the Morrison resources," Veronica reminded him as he passed her desk. Daniel made a swift calculation. "Approve the additional budget they requested, but tell them I want daily progress reports." Veronica looked surprised. Daniel was notorious for trimming budgets, not expanding them. "Yes, sir. Also, Mr. Harrington called again about the charity gala next month. He's quite insistent that you attend this year." "Tell him I'll consider it," Daniel replied distractedly, his mind already returning to the Reed Pharmaceuticals documents waiting on his desk. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and decisions, though Daniel found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to the puzzle of Elena Reyes and her quadruplets. By the time he left the office at 9:15, he had formulated a dozen theories about her relationship with his father, none of them entirely satisfactory. Dorchester's streets were quieter at night, though still a far cry from the manicured serenity of his own neighborhood. Daniel parked in the same spot as before, noticing how out of place his luxury car looked among the aged sedans and practical minivans lining the street. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow over the worn front steps. Daniel knocked softly, conscious of sleeping children within. Elena opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting nearby. She wore simple jeans and a faded, mighty sweatshirt, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, a striking contrast to her careful professional appearance at work. "Come in," she said quietly, leading him to the same modest living room. "Can I offer you coffee, tea?" "Coffee would be fine," Daniel replied, taking the same seat as before. The photographs on the wall seemed to watch him, particularly the family image that had so shocked him the previous night. Elena returned with 2 mugs of coffee, the ceramic chipped but clean. She'd prepared his with a precision that surprised him. Black with a single sugar, exactly as he preferred it. "You remember how I take my coffee?" he remarked. "You ordered. The same thing every day during the SmartCode transition meetings," Elena explained. "I notice patterns." Daniel nodded, reminded of her technical mind. A valuable trait for a developer. An awkward silence fell between them. Employer and employee, strangers connected by a ghost. Finally, Daniel set down his mug and spoke directly. "I found your name in the RP619 research team records," he said. "You were listed as an undergraduate assistant." Elena nodded. "I joined the lab in my sophomore year. Your father recruited me from his introductory biochemistry course. You were a biochemistry major, not computer science." "Double major," Elena explained. "I loved the logic of coding, but the potential of medical research to help people attracted me too. Your father understood that duality. He was incorporating computational models into pharmaceutical research when most labs were still using traditional methods." Daniel absorbed this, recognizing the pioneering approach that had initially made Reed Pharmaceuticals a darling of the medical and investment communities. Yet you ultimately chose programming over research. A shadow crossed Elena's face After the RP619 disaster and your father's death, continuing in pharmaceutical research became complicated. The industry was wary of anyone associated with that trial. Programming offered a cleaner slate. Daniel leaned forward. I want to know what really happened with that trial. Not the official story, not the media version. What you saw as someone who was there. Elena took a deep breath as if preparing to navigate dangerous waters. Are you sure you want to hear this? I've spent 15 years building a company that's the antithesis of my father's failure, Daniel said quietly. I think I deserve to know exactly what that failure entailed. Elena nodded, seeming to accept the logic. RP619 was revolutionary, a targeted immunomodulator that could selectively suppress harmful immune responses while preserving beneficial ones. The early results were incredible. Patients with debilitating autoimmune conditions showing 80 to 90% improvement with minimal side effects. What changed in the phase 3 trials? Daniel pressed. Pressure, Elena said simply. The initial investors wanted returns, competitors were developing similar compounds, and your father was convinced that getting to market first was crucial. When the expanded trials showed a 3% incidence of liver complications, there was internal debate about delaying submission to investigate further. But my father pushed forward, Daniel concluded, the familiar disappointment settling in his chest. It wasn't that simple, Elena countered, surprising him. Richard believed the benefits far outweighed the risks, that post-market surveillance could address the complications. He wasn't wrong from a purely statistical perspective. The drug would have helped thousands more than it harmed. But that's not how the public or the FDA saw it, Daniel said bitterly. No, Elena agreed. Once the first serious adverse events were reported, everything unraveled. The media focused on the patients who suffered, not the many who improved. Investors panicked, stock collapsed, and the company couldn't recover. Daniel had lived through the aftermath, the family fortune decimated, their social standing destroyed, his father's reputation in tatters. He'd been 17, watching his comfortable world disintegrate in a matter of weeks. What you may not know, Elena continued carefully, is that your father never stopped trying to understand what went wrong. After the company collapsed, he continued research in a small lab space at MIT using his personal funds. He was convinced there was a specific genetic factor predisposing that 3% to the liver complications. This was new information. Daniel had assumed his father spent his final months in bitter resignation, not continued scientific pursuit. I helped him, Elena added. We worked nights, weekends, using computational models to identify potential genetic markers, and we were getting close when he died, Daniel finished, his heart attack. Elena nodded, pain evident in her expression. The stress, the public humiliation, the sense of failure, it was too much. But he never gave up on believing RP619 could help people if we could just identify who was at risk for complications. Daniel processed this revelation in silence. His father's determination, even in disgrace, resonated with something deep within himself, the same relentless drive that had built Pinnacle from nothing. What happened to that research after he died? He finally asked. Elena hesitated. It's complicated. Before she could elaborate, a small sound from the hallway interrupted them. One of the quadruplets, Mateo, Daniel recalled, stood in the doorway, clutching a well-worn teddy bear. "Mama," he whispered, "Lucas is having the bad dream again." Elena immediately rose. "Excuse me, Mr. Reed. This might take a few minutes." Daniel nodded, watching as she took her son's hand and disappeared down the hallway. Left alone, he found himself drawn again to the photographs on the wall. The image of his father in the laboratory showed a man in his element, confident, purposeful, alive with intellectual energy, so different from Daniel's memories of his final months. Next to this was a newer addition he hadn't noticed the previous night. A small framed certificate announcing Elena Reyes as recipient of the Richard Reed Memorial Scholarship for Women in Science. The date corresponded with Elena's senior year at MIT, shortly after his father's death. Daniel was still studying this when Elena returned, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry about that. Lucas has nightmares sometimes. They all do, actually. Part of being a multiple, the doctors say. They share anxieties as well as DNA." "No need to apologize," Daniel said, surprising himself with his patience. "Is he all right?" "Yes, he just needs reassurance that everyone's safe." Elena resumed her seat. "Where were we?" "You were about to explain what happened to my father's research after his death," Daniel reminded her. "You said it was complicated." Elena nodded, tension evident in her posture. "Your father's final work was never published. After his death, when MIT cleared out his unofficial lab space, most of his notes and samples were discarded. I managed to save some of the computational models and key findings, but without his reputation or resources, pursuing the research wasn't feasible. So his theory about genetic markers was never validated," Daniel concluded. "Not officially," Elena agreed, "though I've kept an eye on the field. In recent years, there have been several studies supporting the concept of pharmacogenomic screening for immunomodulatory drugs, essentially confirming what your father proposed too early." The irony wasn't lost on Daniel. His father's scientific instincts had been correct, just premature. It was cold comfort for a legacy destroyed and a life cut short. "There's something else you should know," Elena said, her voice growing quieter. "Something that might explain why those photographs are on my wall, why your father's memory is important to me." Daniel braced himself, unsure what further revelation awaited. "The quadruplets," Elena began, then paused, seemingly searching for words. "Lucas, Matteo, Isabella, and Sophia are the result of fertility treatments I underwent after being told I couldn't conceive naturally due to an autoimmune condition." Daniel felt a chill of premonition. "What condition?" "Systemic lupus," Elena answered. "Diagnosed my junior year at MIT. The same condition RP619 was primarily designed to treat." The pieces began to align in Daniel's mind. "You were more than just my father's research assistant," Elena nodded. "I was patient zero in his unofficial continuation study. When conventional treatments weren't controlling my symptoms, he offered me the chance to try a refined version of RP619 with additional safeguards to prevent liver complications." "He experimented on you?" Daniel was aghast, horrified at the ethical implications. "No," Elena corrected firmly. "I was a fully informed participant in research I believed in. I'd seen the data, understood the risks and potential benefits. It wasn't experimentation. It was an act of faith in science and in your father's vision." "And it worked?" Daniel asked, still processing this bombshell. "Better than either of us anticipated," Elena confirmed. "My symptoms improved dramatically, allowing me to complete my degree and begin my career. The only significant side effect was that the medication temporarily affected my fertility, hence the aggressive fertility treatments years later that resulted in quadruplets rather than the single child I'd planned for." Daniel sat back, overwhelmed by these revelations. His father, discredited and disgraced, had continued his research in secret, treating a young woman with an unapproved drug formulation, actions that could have resulted in criminal charges had they been discovered. Yet that treatment had apparently saved Elena from debilitating illness. allowing her the life and career she now had, albeit with unexpected complications in the form of 4 identical children. "Why are you telling me this now?" Daniel finally asked. Elena met his gaze directly. "Because you deserve to know the full truth about your father, not the cautionary tale of corporate greed or scientific hubris that the media created, but the complex reality of a brilliant man who made mistakes but never stopped trying to make them right." The honesty in her words resonated with something long buried in Daniel's heart, his own complicated grief for a father he'd simultaneously idolized and blamed for their family's downfall. "There's more," Elena added hesitantly. "Your father left something for you." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" Elena rose and moved to a small desk in the corner of the room. From a locked drawer, she removed a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "He gave this to me the day before he died," she explained, handing it to Daniel. "Made me promise to deliver it to you when the time was right. For years I wasn't sure when that would be, or how I'd ever manage to get it to you. Then fate brought us together through Pinnacle's acquisition of SmartCode, and still I hesitated." Daniel stared at the envelope, bearing his name in his father's distinctive handwriting. "Why give it to me now?" Elena smiled sadly. "Because you came looking for answers about my connection to your father, and because 15 years is long, enough to wait for whatever message he wanted you to have." With slightly trembling hands, Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a single page covered front and back with his father's hurried script. "I'll give you privacy," Elena offered, moving toward the kitchen. "No," Daniel said quietly. "Stay." As Elena settled back into her chair, Daniel began to read his father's final message. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then I've failed to resolve the RP-619 situation in my lifetime, and Elena has determined you're ready for the truth. I hope you're older and wiser than the angry young man I left behind, capable of understanding that scientific progress rarely follows a straight line. First, I must apologize for the burden my failures placed on you and your mother. Pride and fear prevented me from admitting my mistakes until it was too late to salvage the company or my reputation. I rushed RP-619 to market not just for profit, but because I truly believed in its potential to relieve suffering. That belief wasn't wrong, but my implementation was flawed. Second, I want you to know that Elena Reyes represents my attempt at redemption. When conventional treatments failed her lupus, I offered her a refined version of RP-619, incorporating genetic screening protocols I should have implemented from the beginning. Her remarkable recovery confirms my core theory was sound, though too late for my career or legacy. Finally, I've enclosed with this letter the complete data from Elena's treatment, along with my revised research protocols. This information could still help countless patients suffering from autoimmune conditions. Whether you choose to pursue this research under your own name, donate it anonymously to a reputable lab, or simply destroy it, is your decision. I've burdened you enough without adding this obligation. Know that despite my failings as a businessman and the public disgrace I brought upon our family, everything I did was in pursuit of genuine scientific advancement. I hope whatever path you've chosen in life has brought you greater wisdom and happiness than I managed to achieve. With love and regret. Your father Daniel looked up from the letter, his composure threatening to crack for the first time in years. He mentions data enclosed with this letter. Elena nodded, returning to the desk drawer. She removed a small USB drive, its plastic casing marked with his father's initials. All his research, his updated protocols, my complete case history, everything that might have rehabilitated his scientific reputation if he'd lived. She held out the drive. It belongs to you now. Daniel accepted the small device, its weight seemingly disproportionate to its size. Why didn't you pursue this yourself? With this evidence, you could have vindicated him. I was a 22-year-old research assistant with no standing in the scientific community, Elena explained. And your father was clear. The decision about what to do with this information belonged to his family, to you. A realization struck Daniel. You've been waiting 15 years to fulfill this obligation to my father. Yes, Elena acknowledged, though I never expected it would happen like this. When I recognized your name after the SmartCode acquisition, I thought perhaps fate was providing an opportunity, but approaching you directly seemed presumptuous. So you kept his photograph on your wall and waited. And raised my children, and built my career, Elena added with a gentle firmness. Your father was an important chapter in my life, but not the whole story. Daniel looked at her with new understanding. This woman had carried his father's scientific legacy and final message for 15 years, while simultaneously building a life for herself and her unexpectedly large family. The fortitude required for either task was substantial. Managing both bordered on heroic. Thank you, he said finally, the words inadequate but sincere, for preserving this, for sharing it with me now, and for giving me a more complete picture of my father. Elena nodded, acceptance in her eyes. He was proud of you, you know. Even at the end, when everything was falling apart, he believed you would build something remarkable from the ashes of his failure. The validation from beyond the grave struck Daniel with unexpected force. He had spent 15 years distancing himself from his father's scientific legacy, building Pinnacle in the technology sector rather than pharmaceuticals, establishing a corporate culture of caution and verification that was the antithesis of Reed Pharmaceuticals' final chapter. Yet despite all his efforts to forge a different path, here was his father's ghost, reaching across time through Elena Reyes and her extraordinary children, pulling him back to unfinished business and unanswered questions. A small noise from the hallway drew their attention. This time it was Sophia, her dark eyes serious as she regarded the two adults. Lucas is still scared, she reported solemnly. He says the monsters are back. Daniel watched as Elena rose again, the weight of responsibility evident in her movements. I should go, he said, standing as well. It's getting late, and you have enough to handle without entertaining your boss. Elena hesitated, visibly torn between her children's needs and the unfinished conversation. Will you? What will you do with the research? I don't know yet, Daniel answered honestly, tucking the letter and USB drive into his pocket. I need time to process everything I've learned tonight. As they moved toward the door, Daniel found himself stopping before the family photograph that had initiated this strange journey into his past. If you don't mind my asking, how did the quadruplets happen? You mentioned fertility treatments, but after my lupus went into remission thanks to your father's treatment, I focused on my career, Elena explained. By the time I considered having children, I was told natural conception would be difficult due to complications from both the disease and its treatment. I underwent IVF, and the doctor suggested implanting multiple embryos to increase the chances of at least one successful pregnancy. And all 4 succeeded, Daniel concluded. Against astronomical odds, Elena agreed, a mix of pride and exhaustion in her smile. The complexity of identical quadruplets wasn't exactly in my life plan, but they're the greatest blessing I've ever received, challenging as it can be. Daniel nodded, understanding on a theoretical level while knowing he couldn't truly comprehend the daily reality of her life. The flexible schedule I authorized today, will that help? More than you know, Elena answered with genuine gratitude. The morning routine is particularly difficult, with 4 kindergartners who need to be dressed, fed, and prepared for school, while I simultaneously prepare for work. Even 2 remote days weekly will make an enormous difference. As Daniel prepared to leave, Sophia approached, studying him with the solemn intensity only a child can master. "Are you really not going to fire my mama?" she asked directly. Daniel knelt to her level, oddly compelled to address her as an equal. "No, Sophia, your mother's job is secure." The child nodded, accepting his word without the skepticism an adult might have shown. "Good, she types really fast and makes amazing codes. That's what she tells us." A smile tugged at Daniel's lips. "Yes, she does. Your mother is very talented." Sophia continued to study him, then offered her own assessment. "You look sad, like Lucas when he misses someone who's gone away." The perceptiveness of her observation caught Daniel off guard. Before he could formulate a response, Sophia had returned to her mother's side, mission apparently accomplished. "Children have no filters," Elena apologized, "especially mine." "It's refreshing, actually," Daniel admitted, realizing he was surrounded by yes-men and sycophants in his daily life, people too intimidated to offer honest observations. "Thank you for tonight, Ms. Reyes, for everything." "Elena," she corrected gently. "After everything we've discussed, I think we can dispense with formalities outside the office." Daniel nodded, strangely moved by this small concession. "Elena, then. Good night." As he walked to his car, Daniel felt the weight of the USB drive. In his pocket, a technological time capsule containing his father's final work and perhaps his redemption. Whether that redemption would extend to Daniel himself remained to be seen. The contrast between the humble duplex behind him and the gleaming Pinnacle tower downtown had never seemed more stark nor more arbitrary. Success and failure, disgrace and redemption. The lines between them were thinner than he'd ever acknowledged. Starting his car, Daniel glanced back at the house one final time. Through the window, he could see Elena gathering Sophia into her arms, their silhouettes merging into a single shape against the warm light within. Whatever else happened, Daniel knew his perception of success had been irrevocably altered by what he discovered in this modest home. Tomorrow, he would return to Pinnacle as its uncompromising CEO. But tonight, driving through the quiet streets of Dorchester, he was simply Richard Reed's son, carrying a legacy both heavier and more hopeful than he'd ever imagined. The laboratory was eerily quiet at 3 a.m., illuminated only by the blue glow of computer screens and the occasional flash of equipment indicators. Daniel had been staring at the data from his father's USB drive for hours, cross-referencing the findings with current research papers he'd downloaded from scientific journals. The evidence was compelling, even to his untrained eye. Richard Reed's modified formulation of RP619 had indeed successfully treated Elena's lupus without the liver complications that had doomed the original drug. "You've been at this for 6 hours straight," said Dr. Lydia Nakamura, the pharmaceutical researcher Daniel had discreetly hired to review his father's work. "What are you hoping to find that wasn't in my report?" Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. "Confirmation, I suppose. Validation that my father wasn't completely wrong." "He wasn't wrong about the drug's potential," Dr. Nakamura said, sliding a printed analysis across the table. "His approach to genetic screening would have prevented the adverse events that tanked the clinical trials. If anything, he was ahead of his time. Personalized medicine based on genetic profiles is standard practice now, but it was revolutionary 15 years ago." 3 weeks had passed since Daniel had received his father's letter and research data from Elena. 3 weeks of late nights researching pharmaceutical regulations, consulting with experts under strict confidentiality agreements, and reconsidering everything he thought he knew about Richard Reed's legacy. If he had waited another year, implemented these screening protocols, Daniel began. History might have been very different, Dr. Nakamura finished. But pharmaceutical development doesn't reward patience, especially when investors are breathing down your neck. Daniel knew this all too well. The pressure to deliver results drove every industry, not just pharmaceuticals. Hadn't he applied the same relentless standards at Pinnacle, pushing development teams to meet impossible deadlines, prioritizing market dominance over every other consideration? What would it take to revive this research? He asked abruptly. Hypothetically speaking, Dr. Nakamura considered the question carefully. Substantial investment, a research team, new clinical trials with modern protocols, and most importantly, a champion within the industry willing to attach their name to a compound with RP619's history. Daniel nodded, having anticipated this answer. Thank you for your time, Doctor. Your assessment has been invaluable. After Dr. Nakamura departed, Daniel remained in the lab, contemplating the decisions before him. Pinnacle Technologies was at a crossroads, preparing to launch a revolutionary AI platform that would cement its market dominance for years to come. His leadership team was counting on his full attention during this critical phase. Yet here he was contemplating a detour into pharmaceutical research, a field he had deliberately avoided for 15 years. Haunted by his father's disgrace. His phone chimed with a text message. Elena, just checking if we're still on for tomorrow's demo. The team has the prototype ready. Daniel had almost forgotten the presentation scheduled for the Morrison project, the banking interface Elena's team had been developing. In the 3 weeks since their late-night conversation, their professional relationship had remained strictly appropriate, with no mention of his father's research or her personal connection to it. Only the revised work schedule and occasional lingering glance acknowledged the hidden complexity between them. Confirmed. 10 a.m., he replied, then hesitated before adding, "How are the children?" Her response came quickly. "All 4 fighting. In colds this week, but improving. Sophia asked about you yesterday." Daniel smiled, despite his exhaustion. During a brief encounter when he dropped off some documents at Elena's home the previous week, Sophia had insisted on showing him her science project, a meticulous model of the solar system constructed from painted styrofoam balls and wire. Her precise explanation of planetary orbits had impressed him, revealing an intelligence that matched her mother's. "Tell her I hope her Saturn's rings are holding up," he texted back, referring to the delicate construction that had concerned the child. "Will do. Get some rest, Daniel. You sound tired even via text." The casual use of his first name still felt new, a small but significant shift in their relationship. Daniel gathered his notes and left the laboratory, wondering when exactly Elena Reyes had begun to see past his carefully constructed facade of corporate invulnerability. The following morning, Daniel arrived at Pinnacle to find his executive team in crisis mode. Overnight, their primary competitor had announced a similar AI platform to the one Pinnacle was developing, with an accelerated release date that would beat them to market by 2 months. "They must have had a mole in our development team," fumed Marcus Chen, Pinnacle's chief strategy officer. "There's no way they independently developed something this similar." "Does it matter?" Daniel asked calmly, surprising his executives. "Whether espionage or coincidence, the reality remains the same. They're going to market before us." "We could accelerate our timeline," suggested Diane Winters, VP of Product Development. "Cut some of the secondary features, reduce testing cycles." "No," Daniel interrupted firmly. "We're not compromising quality to be first." The executives exchanged confused glances. This was not the Daniel Reed they knew. the man who had built Pinnacle on the principle that market dominance trumped all other considerations. "But sir," Marcus protested, "being first to market with this technology is worth billions. The industry leader will set the standards everyone else follows." Daniel leaned forward, his expression intense. "And if we rush to market with an inferior product that causes significant problems, what then? How much will our reputation suffer? How many users will we lose permanently?" The room fell silent as his leadership team processed this unexpected perspective. Daniel continued, his voice level but firm. "We will maintain our original development schedule. We will deliver a product that's fully tested, secure, and reliable. And when our competitors' hastily released platform inevitably reveals its flaws, we'll be positioned as the thoughtful, responsible alternative." He stood, signaling the end of the discussion. "Now, I believe we have the Morrison interface demonstration in 10 minutes. As they filed toward the main conference room, Diane fell into step beside Daniel. "That was unexpected," she said quietly. "May I ask what prompted this approach?" Daniel considered the question, unsure how to explain the profound shift in his thinking without revealing its complicated origins. "Let's just say I've been reconsidering the true cost of being first at any price." The Morrison interface demonstration proceeded flawlessly, with Elena's team showcasing an elegant, intuitive system that exceeded the client's specifications. Throughout the presentation, Daniel found himself observing Elena with newfound respect, not just for her technical skills, but for her leadership ability and the quiet strength that had enabled her to overcome extraordinary challenges. When the clients departed, visibly impressed, Daniel asked Elena to remain behind. "Excellent work," he said once they were alone. "The Morrison Bank will be thrilled with this implementation." "Thank you," Elena replied professionally. "The team worked incredibly hard to get everything right." "I've been reviewing my father's research," Daniel said, abruptly changing subjects. "I consulted with a pharmaceutical researcher who confirmed his revised approach was scientifically sound." Elena's composure faltered slightly. "I see. Have you decided what you'll do with the information?" "Not entirely," Daniel admitted, "but I wanted to ask, would you be willing to share your medical records from that time? As the only patient who received the modified treatment, your data is invaluable." Elena hesitated, understandably protective of her private medical information. "To what end, exactly?" "I'm exploring options for reviving the research," Daniel explained, "potentially restarting clinical trials with the improved protocols my father developed." Surprise registered on Elena's face. "That would require significant resources. A pharmaceutical research division isn't exactly aligned with Pinnacle's core business." "No," Daniel agreed, "it isn't." Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. "You're considering a completely new venture, something separate from Pinnacle." Daniel nodded, the idea solidifying as he spoke it aloud. "Read Biomedical. A fresh start building on my father's final research while learning from his mistakes." Elena regarded him thoughtfully. "That's a significant departure from the path you've been on. Are you sure?" It was a fair question. Daniel had spent 15 years building Pinnacle into a technology powerhouse, distancing himself from his father's scientific legacy. Changing direction now, at the peak of his success, seemed illogical from a purely business perspective. "I'm not abandoning Pinnacle," Daniel clarified, "but I've realized there's unfinished business I need to address. My father made serious mistakes, but his core aim, developing treatments that could help people like you, was worthwhile." Elena nodded slowly. "I'll provide whatever medical records you need, and..." She hesitated briefly. "If you're serious about this venture, I'd like to be involved. not just as a former patient, but as someone who understood the science behind the original research. Daniel hadn't anticipated this offer, but he immediately recognized its value. Your coding expertise would be an asset for the computational modeling aspects, he acknowledged, though it would mean dividing your time between projects. I'm accustomed to managing multiple responsibilities, Elena said with a wry smile that spoke volumes about her life as a single mother of quadruplets. Before Daniel could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Veronica. The Harrington Foundation is on the line about the charity gala tomorrow night. They're insisting on confirming your attendance. Daniel had completely forgotten about the event, a high-profile fundraiser for children's medical research that he had declined to attend for the past several years, despite Pinnacle being a major sponsor. Tell them I'll be there, he replied, making a spontaneous decision. Then, glancing at Elena, he added, and ask if they can accommodate an additional guest from Pinnacle. Elena raised an eyebrow. Are you asking me to the gala? In a professional capacity, Daniel clarified, though he wasn't entirely certain that was true. It would give us an opportunity to discuss the biomedical project further, away from the office. I'd need to find childcare for 4 kindergartners on short notice, Elena pointed out. Not an easy task. Bring them, Daniel suggested impulsively. It's a children's charity event. There will be activities for kids in a separate area. The Harrington Foundation is known for it. Elena looked skeptical. The quadruplets at a black-tie gala, that sounds like a recipe for chaos. Sometimes chaos leads to unexpected opportunities, Daniel replied, surprising himself with the sentiment. Besides, I suspect they'd enjoy seeing their mother dressed up for an evening out. After a moment's consideration, Elena nodded. All right. But fair warning, the logistics of preparing 4 5-year-olds for a formal event is not for the faint of heart. I'll send a car, Daniel offered. 7 o'clock? Make it 6:30, Elena countered. Everything takes longer with quadruplets. The following evening, Daniel's driver reported an unexpected delay picking up Elena and the children. Standing in the grand foyer of the Harrington Foundation's historic building, Daniel checked his watch repeatedly, greeting other guests with distracted courtesy as he wondered what had gone wrong. At 7:45, just as he was about to call Elena directly, his driver messaged, "Arriving now, sir." Daniel moved to the entrance, watching as his sleek company car pulled up to the red carpet. The scene that unfolded was not what he had anticipated. Elena emerged first, transformed from the practical software developer he knew into an elegant vision in a simple navy gown, her dark hair swept up to reveal the graceful curve of her neck. But it was what followed that caught everyone's attention. 4 impeccably dressed children, each holding a corner of a large science fair display board, managing the awkward load with practiced coordination. "I'm so sorry we're late," Elena apologized as they approached. "Isabella decided at the last minute that we absolutely had to bring her science project to show the doctors who help sick kids." Daniel found himself charmed, rather than annoyed, by the delay. "Hello, Isabella. What's your project about?" The shy girl brightened immediately. "It's about how medicines work in the body. Mama helped me understand because of her special medicine that made her better." Daniel glanced at Elena, who shrugged helplessly. She wanted to know why she has to take medicine for her kidneys, and one explanation led to another. "Well, there are definitely doctors here who would be interested in your project," Daniel assured Isabella. "Let's find a good place for it." As they entered the gala, Daniel was acutely aware of the attention their unusual group attracted. He was accustomed to being noticed as Pinnacle's CEO, but tonight the whispers and glances were directed at Elena and the quadruplets. 4 identical children in perfect formal attire, moving with the synchronized grace that still sometimes gave them an almost otherworldly appearance. "Mr. Reed, we'd almost given up on you," exclaimed Catherine Harrington, the Foundation's elderly but formidable director. "And you've brought guests. How wonderful." Daniel made the introductions, watching with amusement as Catherine's initial surprise gave way to genuine delight when Isabella earnestly explained her science project. "Young lady, you must show this to Dr. Montgomery," Catherine declared. "He's leading our pediatric research division and would be fascinated by your work." As Catherine led Isabella away, with her siblings naturally following in formation, Elena turned to Daniel with a bemused expression. "I should go with them." "They'll be fine with Catherine," Daniel assured her. "She raised 6 children of her own. Besides, this gives us a chance to talk." They moved through the elegant crowd toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. Daniel was surprised to find himself enjoying the event, particularly observing Elena's interactions with the Foundation's scientific advisors. Her intelligence and insight into medical research impressed these accomplished professionals, many of whom had no idea she was primarily a software developer. "Your background is fascinating, Ms. Reyes," commented Dr. Lawrence Montgomery after a detailed discussion of autoimmune treatment protocols. "Have you considered returning to biomedical research? The field needs minds like yours." Before Elena could respond, Lucas appeared at her side, his expression serious. "Mama, Isabella's medicine alarm went off, but she doesn't have her backpack." Elena's relaxed demeanor immediately shifted to maternal efficiency. "Excuse me, gentlemen, medical necessity calls." As she departed with Lucas, Dr. Montgomery turned to Daniel. "Remarkable woman. And those children, quadruplets, correct? The statistical probability is extraordinary. Everything about them is extraordinary," Daniel agreed, watching as Elena expertly navigated the crowd, Lucas guiding her to where his sisters waited. "You seem quite taken with this family," Dr. Montgomery observed with the directness of a scientist accustomed to noting patterns. Daniel didn't bother to deny it. "They've expanded my perspective in unexpected ways." Dr. Montgomery nodded thoughtfully. "Life often delivers our greatest lessons through unplanned encounters. That's been my experience, at least." When Elena returned, Daniel noticed the slight tension in her shoulders that indicated maternal concern. "Everything all right?" "Isabella forgot her evening medication," Elena explained. "We'll need to head home soon so she can take it on schedule." "Of course," Daniel said immediately. "Let me call the driver." As they gathered the children and Isabella's science project, Catherine Harrington intercepted them. "Leaving so soon? But we haven't had the formal program yet. Daniel, you're being recognized for Pinnacle's contributions." "A medical necessity," Daniel explained smoothly. "Perhaps you could accept the recognition on my behalf." Catherine looked surprised but nodded. "Well, if you must. But Ms. Reyes, please bring these wonderful children to our family science day next month. Isabella's project was a hit with our research team." In the car, with 4 tired children gradually succumbing to sleep against the leather seats, Elena turned to Daniel with an apologetic smile. "Not exactly the professional networking opportunity you'd planned." "Actually, it was illuminating in ways I hadn't anticipated," Daniel replied. "Dr. Montgomery was quite impressed with your knowledge of biomedical research." Elena glanced at her sleeping children. Another life, another path. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd continued in that direction. "It's not too late," Daniel said quietly. "If you were serious about wanting involvement in the Reed biomedical project." Elena studied his face in the dim light of the car. "You're really going through with it?" "I've already instructed my legal team to begin the incorporation process." Daniel confirmed. Initial funding will come from my personal resources to keep it separate from Pinnacle's operations. That's a significant commitment, Elena observed. Daniel nodded, watching the city lights pass outside the window. Some legacies deserve a second chance. The car pulled up to Elena's duplex, now familiar territory to Daniel. Let me help you get them inside, he offered, noting how deeply the children were sleeping. Together, they carried the quadruplets from the car, Daniel taking Lucas and Matteo, while Elena managed Sofia and Isabella. The simple domestic task, carrying sleeping children to their beds, felt strangely right to Daniel, despite being utterly foreign to his usual existence. Once the children were settled, Elena offered Daniel coffee in the kitchen, away from the bedrooms where the quadruplets slept. "Thank you for tonight," she said, hands wrapped around her mug. It meant a lot to the children to attend a grown-up party, especially Isabella with her science project. "She's quite remarkable," Daniel replied. "They all are. You've done an amazing job raising them, especially considering the circumstances." Elena smiled tiredly. "Some days are better than others, but yes, they're the best thing that ever happened to me, challenges and all." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the events of the evening settling between them. Finally, Daniel spoke the question that had been forming in his mind for weeks. "The flexible schedule is working well for you?" "It's been a lifesaver," Elena confirmed. "Being able to work from home 2 days a week has transformed our morning routine. The children are happier, I'm less stressed, and my productivity has actually increased." Daniel nodded, pleased but not surprised. "I've been thinking about expanding that option to other employees with significant family responsibilities." Elena looked up sharply. "That would be a major policy shift for Pinnacle." "Yes," Daniel agreed, "one of several I'm considering." "Because of us?" Elena asked directly. Daniel considered the question carefully. "Because you've helped me recognize that my definition of professional excellence was unnecessarily narrow. That accommodation isn't weakness, and that people can deliver exceptional results under various conditions if given the right support." "That's quite an evolution in thinking," Elena observed. "I've had an exceptional teacher," Daniel replied, meeting her gaze. The moment between them lengthened, charged with unspoken possibilities. Daniel found himself noticing details he'd overlooked before. The intelligence in her dark eyes, the quiet strength in her bearing, the way exhaustion somehow enhanced rather than diminished her natural beauty. "Daniel," Elena said, softly breaking the spell. "Whatever's happening here between us, it's complicated by our professional relationship. You're still my boss." "Not for Reed Biomedical," Daniel pointed out. "That would be a partnership, not an employer-employee relationship." Elena smiled wryly. "Semantics. The power dynamic remains." "Then perhaps we need to address that directly," Daniel suggested. "I value your contributions to Pinnacle, but I suspect your talents would be better utilized in the biomedical project, especially given your personal connection to the research." "Are you offering me a job or trying to simplify a potential personal relationship?" Elena asked, her directness refreshing after years of people telling Daniel what they thought he wanted to hear. "Both, I suppose," he admitted. "Though I hadn't planned to express it quite so bluntly." Elena laughed softly. "Blunt works for me. But Daniel, you need to understand, I come with 4 extraordinary complications who will always be my priority. Any relationship, professional or personal, would need to accommodate that reality." "I'm beginning to appreciate those complications," Daniel said truthfully, "though I won't pretend to fully understand the challenges you face daily." Before Elena could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. "Mama, I had the falling dream again." Sofia stood there in her pajamas, looking smaller and more vulnerable than her daytime persona. Without hesitation, Elena opened her arms, and the child climbed into her lap, burying her face against her mother's shoulder. "It's okay, mi amor," Elena soothed. "Remember what we talked about? Dreams can't hurt you." "But it felt so real," Sophia whispered. "We were all falling and no one could catch us." Daniel watched this intimate moment, feeling simultaneously like an intruder and a privileged witness. The tenderness between mother and child stirred something long dormant within him, a longing for connection that his driven, isolated existence had never satisfied. "Sometimes," he found himself saying, "the scariest part of falling is thinking no one will be there to catch you." Sophia looked up at him with solemn eyes. "Do you have falling dreams too?" "Sometimes," Daniel admitted, "though mine are usually about failing rather than falling." "That's the same thing," Sophia declared with a child's certainty. "Mama says everybody's afraid of something, even grown-ups." "Your mama is very wise," Daniel replied, meeting Elena's gaze over her daughter's head. Sophia yawned hugely, already relaxing as the nightmare's grip faded. "Can Mr. Daniel come to breakfast tomorrow?" she asked sleepily. "He looks like he doesn't eat enough pancakes." Elena laughed softly. "That's for Mr. Daniel to decide. He's a very busy man." To his own surprise, Daniel found himself saying, "I'd like that very much, Sophia, if it's all right with your mother." As Elena carried the drowsy child back to bed, Daniel remained in the kitchen, contemplating the unexpected turns his life had taken since that first night he'd followed Elena home, intent on firing her. The photographs on the wall that had once shocked him now seemed like signposts pointing toward a different future than the one he'd meticulously planned. When Elena returned, she found Daniel studying the USB drive he'd taken from his pocket, the one containing his father's research. "I've made a decision," he said without preamble. "Reed Biomedical will proceed, with the primary goal of completing my father's work on RP619. But I want you to lead the research team, not just participate." Elena looked startled. "Daniel, I haven't worked in laboratory science for years. My expertise is in software development now, which makes you uniquely qualified to bridge the computational modeling aspects with the clinical applications," Daniel countered. "Besides, you understand this compound better than anyone, as a researcher and as the only patient who received the refined formulation." Elena considered this, her practical nature evidently weighing the proposal's feasibility. It would mean stepping away from the Morrison project at a critical stage. "Diane can take over as lead developer," Daniel suggested. "She's been looking for an opportunity to prove herself. And the quadruplets, this kind of research leadership role would be demanding, time-consuming." "We'll build the lab here in Boston," Daniel said, the plans forming as he spoke. "With a flexible schedule and the option to work remotely when needed. The facility will include a childcare center with qualified staff to accommodate their specific needs." Elena shook her head, though he could see she was intrigued. "You've thought this through in remarkable detail for a spontaneous proposal." "Not entirely spontaneous," Daniel admitted. "I've been considering various scenarios since receiving my father's research." "And what about Pinnacle? You built that company from nothing." "It's in excellent shape with a strong leadership team. I'll remain as chairman, but I'm planning to step back from day-to-day operations." Daniel leaned forward. "This matters more, Elena. Completing my father's work, potentially helping thousands of patients with autoimmune conditions. That's a legacy worth pursuing." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "And us? This complicated thing that's developing between us?" "One step at a time," Daniel suggested. "Professional collaboration first, and then we'll see where it leads. No pressure, no expectations beyond what feels right for both of us and for the children." Elena smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her tired features. That's the most sensible proposal I've heard in a long time, both the professional and personal aspects. Is that a yes? Daniel asked, surprised by how much her answer mattered to him. It's a let's try, Elena clarified. Both parts. The next morning found Daniel seated at Elena's small kitchen table, surrounded by 4 pajama-clad children eagerly explaining their pancake preferences. The domesticity of the scene was both foreign and strangely comfortable, a glimpse of a life fundamentally different from his solitary existence. Mr. Daniel likes blueberries in his pancakes, Matteo announced with authority, though Daniel had expressed no such preference. How do you know that? Elena asked, mixing batter while simultaneously brewing coffee. Because he looks like a blueberry person, Matteo explained, as if this were obvious. Lucas likes chocolate chips because he's always thinking about space, and space is dark like chocolate. Daniel raised an eyebrow at Elena, who shrugged. They have their own logic. I've learned not to question it too deeply. As the kitchen, filled with the comforting aroma of pancakes and coffee, Daniel found himself observing the organized chaos of the quadruplets' morning routine. They moved in their characteristic formation, yet each child's distinct personality shone through in small ways. Lucas, with his book of space facts, Sophia meticulously counting blueberries, Isabella carefully taking her morning medication, and Matteo constructing an elaborate syrup design on his plate. You're staring, Elena noted quietly as she refilled his coffee. I'm learning, Daniel corrected. This is all new territory for me. The humble abode of a single mother with quadruplets? I imagine so. Family, Daniel said simply. I've been so focused on building Pinnacle, on proving myself after my father's disgrace, that I never considered what I was missing. Elena studied him thoughtfully. It's not always pancakes and cute children in pajamas, you know. There are tantrums and illnesses and school problems and 1,000 logistical challenges every day. I'm beginning to understand that, Daniel acknowledged. But seeing you with them, watching how you've created this secure, loving environment despite all the obstacles, it's remarkable, Elena. Before she could respond, Isabella appeared at Daniel's elbow with a solemn expression. Are you going to help Mama make the medicine that made her better? The one in my science project? Daniel glanced at Eleanor, who nodded slightly, indicating she'd explained some version of their planned venture to the children. Yes, Isabella, that's exactly what we're going to do, he answered. Your mother and I are going to work together to help other people who have the same illness she had. Isabella considered this information carefully. My teacher says, when you help people, it makes your heart bigger. Is that why you're helping Mama? Because you want a bigger heart? The innocent question struck Daniel with unexpected force. Maybe, he admitted, or maybe your mama is helping me find the heart I already had. Sophia, never one to be left out of an important conversation, leaned against Daniel's chair. Does that mean you'll come for pancakes more often? Because you look happier when you're here than when you're at the big glass building. Dear Sophia, Elena admonished gently. Mr. Daniel has his own home. But it's probably lonely there, Sophia persisted with a child's unerring instinct for emotional truths. No one to make pancakes with. Daniel met Elena's gaze over the children's heads, a silent communication passing between them. We'll figure it out, he said, the simple phrase addressing far more than breakfast arrangements. Later that morning, as Daniel prepared to leave for a board meeting where he would announce his reduced role at Pinnacle, he paused at the door with Elena. This won't be easy, she warned. Reviving controversial research, starting a new company, figuring out whatever this is between us, all while managing 4 5-year-olds. The most worthwhile things rarely are easy, Daniel replied, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "But for the first time in 15 years, I'm pursuing something that feels right in every sense, professionally and personally." "Mickey, when did the ruthless CEO of Pinnacle Technologies become such a philosopher?" Elena teased gently. "Probably around the time he followed an employee home to fire her and found something unexpected instead," Daniel answered. The memory of that first night already transformed from an uncomfortable intrusion to the beginning of something profound. As he drove toward Pinnacle's gleaming headquarters, Daniel glanced in his rearview mirror, taking one last look at the modest duplex that had changed everything. The worn steps and faded siding no longer registered as signs of economic struggle, but as the outer shell of a genuine home, something his luxurious penthouse had never truly been. His phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "The children want you to know there will be extra blueberries next time. Apparently you've been officially categorized as family in their classification system." Daniel smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sunshine streaming through his windshield. The road ahead would undoubtedly have complications, professional challenges in reviving controversial research, personal adjustments to a life intertwined with 4 remarkable children and their extraordinary mother. But for the first time since his father's disgrace and death, Daniel Reed was pursuing a legacy defined not by market dominance or corporate success, but by the simpler, more profound metrics of healing and connection. Whether that pursuit led to scientific breakthroughs or simply to more pancake breakfasts with 4 identical faces and their resilient mother, he was finally on the right path. As Pinnacle's tower came into view, Daniel mentally prepared for the questions his announcement would raise. How could he explain that following an employee home with the intention of firing her had led to this profound reassessment of his life's direction? That finding his family photograph on her wall had opened a door to both his past and his future. Some transformations defied simple explanation. But as he pulled into his reserved parking space for what would soon be one of his last days as Pinnacle's CEO, Daniel Reed felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, the sense that he was exactly where he was meant to be, heading, exactly where he needed to go. And it had all begun with a moment of compassion overriding corporate protocol, with 4 identical faces and a photograph connecting past to present, with a chance to redeem not just his father's scientific legacy, but his own capacity for human connection. When the Quadruplets graduated from high school 13 years later, valedictorian Lucas Reed Reyes spoke of second chances and unexpected paths, of pancake breakfasts and scientific discoveries. In the audience, Daniel and Elena listened with pride, their hands clasped together, wedding rings catching the afternoon light. "Who would have thought," Elena whispered, "that you following me home to fire me would lead to all this?" Daniel smiled, watching as the other 3 quadruplets, soon to depart for prestigious universities, cheered their brother's speech. "Sometimes," he replied, echoing words spoken long ago in a humble kitchen, "the most worthwhile journeys begin with a single, unexpected detour." Reed Biomedical had successfully brought the reformulated RP619 to market 5 years earlier, transforming treatment options for lupus patients worldwide. Pinnacle Technologies continued to thrive under new leadership, and the modest duplex in Dorchester had given way to a comfortable family home, where weekend pancake breakfasts remained a sacred tradition. Not the life Daniel Reed had planned, certainly, but as he watched the 4 remarkable young adults who had first appeared to him as frightened, identical 5-year-olds, he could imagine no greater success than the family they had built together. Different, roots, same soil, growing stronger with each passing year. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.